When I was a boy growing up in Del City, Oklahoma, I never imagined that I would stand as a soldier having participated in major historic events. I certainly never thought that I would be a featured speaker at different places and travel around the country doing that in foreign countries. I never thought I'd have a memoir published. The biggest question I get asked about my book is like, wow, this is great. Who helped you write it? It's like, I wrote it myself. Infantrymen do have brains. And I certainly never thought that I would serve as a member in Congress. I mean, Franklin can tell you, I was going to stay in the military until they tossed me out. But I'm humbled by it all. And I'm mindful of Proverbs 21:21, where it says, "He that follows after righteousness and mercy finds life, righteousness, and honor." And I know I'm a blessed man. While major events may have been unpredictable, many that knew me in my youth would not be surprised that I became a soldier. As a child, no flower bed was safe from a vast invasion of toy soldiers. And trench lines dug up in the front yard for my G.I. Joes who were man-sized at that time. They weren't these little bitty things. I also maneuvered through the fields, woods, and creeks, which are now populated with shopping centers and everything else, but fighting imaginary mock battles. Grown-ups in my neighborhood, most of them were World War II veterans. My dad served in 53 with the 45th Division, but that generation of World War II and Korean War veterans, and they fascinated me with tales of what it was like to grow up during tough years and what it was like to fight in a tank in North Africa, or what it was like to assault Japanese-held Pacific Islands, or what it was like to liberate Nazi-occupied Europe. And while their experiences varied, they all shared a common love for the United States of America, born of trials and sacrifice. And unknown to me then, God was preparing my own heart and shaping me for future service. And I can relate to the psalmist David, where he says, "He teaches my hands to make war, that a bow can be broken by my arms." My time as a soldier has been soul-searching. How can God teach your hands to make war? And is that right? And your fingers to fight? Can one serve God as an infantryman? God encouraged me, but taught me many important lessons when I failed as well. Christ said in Matthew 8:10 that the greatest faith he ever saw was in a soldier, a Roman soldier, a despised occupying Roman soldier. Having been a despised occupying soldier, I could relate. David's foundational faith was put to the test in an impossible battlefield encounter with Goliath, and it forever changed the way that he looked at life and how he pursued God's own heart. Those that walk in the shadow of death, I'm convinced, experience the truest comfort from God's rod and staff. I served my country as a soldier for over 21 years, not because I was underprivileged or somehow less educated, had to serve in the military, or because I was from Oklahoma and couldn't get a decent job. Rather, it was because I held the conviction of love of country and the American way of life, even when at times people have been perhaps unkind in their convictions about the places we served, the missions that our nation gave us, and the tasks that we achieved. I believe that my service was a calling that God blessed, and little did we know as we embarked from Fort Hood, Texas, in the spring of 2003, that our division would bring a dictator to justice, and the great soldiers that I would command would play a role in that. Now, many people imagine that the Saddam capture was the result of some lofty intelligence handed down, or maybe it was gathered from CIA satellites or people sleuthing it. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was the result of 6 months of very hard work on the part of just regular soldiers working hand in hand with 2 Special Operations Forces teams over a 6-month period. Our first real breakthrough came when we learned from local Iraqis how Saddam operated his protection apparatus before the war. Did you ever have one of those moments where God saved you from yourself? Well, I had one of those moments. Some rocket scientists got the idea that we should set up a civil military information center after we occupied Tikrit, where Iraqis could register complaints about broken stuff. And we had broken a lot of stuff. And it was a magnet for ambushes. We had already lost a soldier, Jesse Holling, and had 5 wounded in actions just related in defending that building. And I wanted it shut down, but I didn't get that decision. And so I was out checking the security of it, and one of my sergeants came up to me and he said, "Sir, we got these 2 Iraqis here, and they've got some information they want to give you." And I don't got time for that. And they said, "Well, they're not going to give it to anybody else unless they give it to you." And I almost just dismissed it. But something inside said, well, what if they have something? And so I said, all right, bring them in. And, with the ubiquitous plastic chairs, I think there's 60 million plastic chairs in Iraq, white plastic chairs. We sat down and talked to them. And for the next 2.5 hours on sheets of butcher paper, they mapped out Saddam's security apparatus and what it looked like and how he was able to protect himself. And they said that these people were still in the area and still protecting Saddam. And they said it revolved around 5 controlling families, and Saddam was the head of it. They were related by blood, by marriage, and by long association when he came into power. And as they mapped it out, and they said it belonged to these families, it was all kept in the family, and he, like a mafia don, was the main guy. It was very much like a mafia network. And as they laid out the relations and the names and all of this, I turned to my operations officer and after they left, and I said, this has got to be the most organized lie I've ever heard, or there's got to be some truth to it. And so taking that information, we developed a strategy to track down these guys. And while they were very good at protecting Saddam, they were less good at protecting themselves. And we just thought if we, it's kind of like Pokemon, go collect the whole set, right? If we would get them, we might be able to find the trail to Saddam. And while I never imagined that my unit would play any role in the hunt and capture of Saddam Hussein, I could sense at the time that if Saddam continued to be protected by this security apparatus and hometown family connections, and it was certainly possible that we could get him. And I commanded the forces in that area. In fact, his personal residence, he had palaces everywhere, but his personal residence in Oja, I had troops occupying. We even swam in his swimming pool. And I look back, we were shooting his rare china plates now, and I'm like, why did we shoot those? But we did. They'd be worth a lot of money now. Well, it was certainly possible that we could get him, and early successes only confirmed that belief. In June, working hand in hand with the Special Operations Forces team led by a guy all called Jack, we got on the trail of this guy. And he was a pretty important guy. His name was Abid Mahmoud, and he was so important that he was the ace of diamonds on the deck of cards. You remember the deck of cards? We had Saddam, his 2 sons, and this guy. And why was he so important? He was Saddam's presidential secretary. He would be like our White House chief of staff. He was the biggest catch of the war up to that time, and we got him in a suburb in northern Tikrit. We did a raid, flushed him out in Saddam's birth village of Oja, and the next night we got him in a suburb area called Qadisiyah, and there's Qadisiyahs in all major populated areas. And as the headlines buzzed with the news of this, we got a tip from these same Iraqi businessmen about Saddam himself, and that he would be hiding on a farm And so we took it serious, put together a raid very quickly, and we narrowly missed Saddam. In fact, how do we know we almost got him? Because we found some amazing stuff on that raid. We got Mrs. Hussein's passport, her national identity cards, the family papers, important documents, stuff like you would have in fireproof boxes in your home. And we got probably like what your wives travel with, over $2 million worth of jewelry. We had individual pieces of jewels that had 40 to 60 carats worth of diamonds and rubies and precious stones, unbelievable wealth. And then when your house is on fire, what do you grab? And the guys are saying, the guns, duh. The women are, more sentimental, like the pictures. Well, we found a little bit of both, and we got the Saddam family photo albums. These were very intimate, personal pictures that they had grabbed, and it was pictures of little Uday and Qusay's birthday parties. How sweet. And Saddam at the beach. I apologize, y'all have eaten breakfast, and that might spoil it for you. These photo albums are now at the National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, Georgia, and they display them there. They probably don't display that picture, but they're there. But if that wasn't enough, the most amazing thing that we got was this. $8.5 million in United States currency and $750,000 in foreign currency. It's in the gym bag behind me there. And if you've ever wanted to know what it's like to sit on $9 million, there it is. It's quite a thrill. And people said, my goodness, what did you do with all that money? Well, retirement was pretty good from the military, but that's a joke. Now that I've got Congress and ethics and all of that, so we were terrified of it, and we had a big soldier, Sergeant First Class Milton Benson. He could bench press like this church. I mean, he was a big guy. And I said, Sergeant Benson, every time this chest of cash gets opened up, you need to account for every single bill. Each stack, short stack, was $100,000. Each bill was a $100 bill. That's a lot of temptation for anybody, so we kept it up. And my Sergeant Major, Pete Martinez, he kept a key in a Series 200 lock, and I had one, and like nuclear secret, we both had to be there with our keys and open up the chest. And so this confirmed for us, if that weren't enough, the next day, $850,000 more was captured from one of Saddam's cousins, trying to flee the area where we did the raid, and we added that to the pile. And it confirmed that Saddam was relying on the support of his old family networks, and the strategy was indeed working. But the enemy did not sit idle. In the months that followed, it was an interesting time in that first year of the war, in those, particularly the first months of the war. And I conveyed to my soldiers, we had already suffered a number of casualties, and I told my soldiers, I said, we're not concerned about what the enemy's going to do. We're going to be the hunters. We're not going to be the hunted. And I told my soldiers that, look, if God intends for me to die in Iraq, it's going to happen. There's nothing I can do to change that. But if he doesn't, there's nothing the enemy can do to make it happen. So let's not worry about that, and let's go do our job and do the mission. And so my soldiers learned the art of the ambush, and we began to exact a heavy toll on the insurgents. We had to teach a different way of fighting and a different way of thinking. And tactically and operationally, we put the hurt on the enemy, and we began to have some great successes. And it also produced information, because as the Iraqis saw that we possessed power and influence, then they would provide us information. And people wanted to be out from under the grip of Saddam. And we received an unbelievable tip as to the whereabouts of this guy. Now, once you see his face, it's amazing how many other pictures that he turns up in. It's like, where's Waldo? You know, he's always in the background there. Some of those of you who got kids, you understand who Waldo is. It was Adnan Abid al-Muslit. Well, he was Saddam's #1 personal bodyguard for more than 20 years. And wherever he was, Saddam could not be that far away. And we successfully captured him in a surprise raid. And the story, once again, made international headlines. There he is as a guest of a couple of my soldiers. And he was a tough guy. He tried to grab a Sterling submachine gun, and they managed to get to him before he did, and then he grappled with them, and they went to fisticuffs, and they drug him down a flight of stairs. That's how he got the little bump on his head there. But during the next few months, the enemy attempted to counter our initiative with attacks, with roadside bombs, with the targeting of Iraqi citizens that were trying to work for the new government. And even so, we continued our pursuit of Saddam's inner circle and successfully countered the insurgents that were fighting us in daily street battles. And while we did lose soldiers, battle has those consequences, unlike what folks that I serve with now seem to think. But we didn't dwell on it. You know, they seem to forget we knew our friends. We knew their laughter, their ambitions, the things that they cared about. And the greatest honor we could bestow on those we lost was to win, not to go around weepy-eyed and head hung down. And so we took advantage of it to get the raids going and to get the information and photos, and it also encouraged the Iraqi people to cooperate with us even more when they saw how we reacted to setbacks. And we took advantage of that and began to solidify our gains and work with the government, with local sheikhs, by training police, creating new Iraqi military forces. And I tried to convey to the press at the time, who really had descended on our unit during much of this time, that the losses that we suffered in no way lessened our ability to accomplish our mission. Not unless they killed every single one of us, and that was not likely to happen. And to the media's credit, they did cover our operations objectively. Now, the editors would do a different story back home, but the field reporters were pretty fair to us. But sometimes even they would question our tactics. And one of the most controversial tactics that we employed was when we tried to deal with Saddam's hometown of Oja. This was a bad town. We had already raided 40% of the homes in that town of 3,000 people. Big homes, 4,000 to 6,000 square feet, marble, massive structures. And it was just a bad place, and I was sick of it. And I said to my staff one day, I said, how much barbed wire would it take to just surround the whole town and make them all prisoner? And they kind of chuckled a little bit. I said, I'm serious. How much would it be? It was a lot. It was 8.5 kilometers of barbed wire. And we put it up on Halloween night by coincidence. And I got the idea from the French. In the 1950s, the French used these isolation tactics in the Kasbahs in Algeria, in the city of Algiers. And what they would do is that the mass of innocent people, then they would ferret out the bad people, because by having them isolated, you'd either have them in prison or they would flee, and then they'd get out with their cell phone, or they'd go out to their other farms or whatever. And we figured that it would have a good positive impact, and it absolutely did. It caught them totally by surprise. In fact, this was the first time in the Iraq War that these isolation tactics were ever employed. And oh my goodness, you would have thought I'd killed somebody's mother because we surrounded this town. They were making comparisons to all kinds of things. But the bottom line was it worked. And the information that we gathered began to snowball. And the most prominent family protecting Saddam had 10 brothers, multiple wife culture. And we had captured 2 of these brothers, Special Operations Forces team that had switched in about the October time frame, led by a guy all called John. They had captured another that was very key, we thought, but unfortunately he died of a heart attack during the raid. Literally, we wanted him. We wanted the information he had, but he didn't make it. And so we were going after this Muslet family. And then I got a strange letter from Dick Dwinell in Central Texas. I don't know who Dick Dwinell is, but he was trying to get a message to me, and I said, okay, send it on. And I got it, And it says, look, I've seen you on television. I know your unit is involved with the hunt for Saddam. And he said, I've also heard you're a praying man. And he said, God knows where Saddam is. And I was like, duh, we don't. He says, if you and your soldiers will pray, he said, God will help you. And I thought, like you need an excuse to pray in battle, right? And so I called on my chaplain and the brigade chaplain and other officers. There's Mike Rahut, who's still serving today. He was my executive officer. And we didn't compel any of our soldiers, but we did pray, and we were open about it, and we asked for God's wisdom, and we asked for just His protection and a little bit of good fortune. And on December 4th, 2003, John's Special Operations team and my battalion planned and executed a successful raid on 8 simultaneous targets. These guys were kind of like the whack-a-mole. You go one to pop up over here and that. So we wanted to get several at the same time. And by hitting 8 simultaneous, we hit every type of family network that they possibly could be hiding in. And the raid was very successful. And it tore into those that were closest to Saddam. And a few days later, a teenage boy walks up to a checkpoint in Tikrit, and he says, I know where some important people are hiding. And it's a real credit to the soldiers that they just didn't shoo him away. And like, get lost, kid. Instead, they tried to talk with him, and then they got a translator, and then they began to see what he had to say. And my commander, Colonel Jim Hickey, which you see here, and he now is the senior military advisor on the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is the Lord up to, putting us up around these places? He decided to talk to the boy, and he took his information. And then he ordered me to take a force to go see about this farm that was west of Tikrit and see what was on it. And so I sent forces out there under Mark Stauffer's company, A Company, and they went out, and amazingly, this raid produced relatives of the very family that had hidden Saddam in 1959. And that year, when Saddam was a young man, I think he was 18, 19, he tried to kill the Iraqi prime minister, typical teenage stuff that people do. And when he tried to escape, this family hid him near the village of Adwar. And as the Iraqi security forces surrounded him, he jumps in the Tigris River and he swims across, gets on a white horse, and rides off to become the tyrant that he became. It became a national holiday, his escape. And each year they'd get out there and they'd belly up and recreate this swim. Kind of amusing to watch the footage. And little did we realize this same farm and this same family would come into play in the next few days. And we also gained vital, pivotal information on the whereabouts of this guy, Mohammed al-Muslit, part of that Muslit family. Virtually unknown before the war. You remember the last public appearance of Saddam as Baghdad Bob was saying, no, there's no American forces, bombs are falling in the background and all of that stuff. Saddam gets out in the public square and he gets up on top of the car and crowds cheering him and all of this. It was April. There you can see April 9th. The guy driving him was Mohammed al-Muslit. And he drove him from Tikrit, we know now from the FBI interrogations after Saddam was captured, and they went to hit. Uday and Qusay fled to Jordan, came back to Tikrit. We flushed them out. They went to Mosul and were later killed by Special Ops and 101st Airborne. We didn't realize, we knew he was important, but we didn't make all of these connections, but we knew he had to know the whereabouts of Saddam if we could ever get our hands on him. And now we had important information. We did a simultaneous raid and put it together. Within 48 hours, John's team had captured him in Baghdad. And Colonel Hickey and I were elated because we felt if he were ever seized, he had to know Saddam's location, and he did. On December 13th, I received a call from Colonel Hickey, and he said, get all your forces ready. I want everything available. This might be the big one. And we had been through this many times, and I reason that if you do nothing, you get nothing. And while we had been on many raids, you might be just one short. Next one. Well, Colonel Hickey said that John's team had gotten Muslit, and he had given Saddam's location near Tikrit. shock. And since I owned the combat forces there, we prepared for action. And as the day went by, we learned Saddam's specific location was near the village of Adwar. Now here you can see on this map, in the middle, you see, well, middle to upper left is about half of the city of Tikrit. And then you've got Saddam's birth village of Oja there in the middle, which is what we surrounded with the barbed wire. To the very bottom of the picture, the little pin there was a Hidoshi farm where we got the $9 million and almost captured Saddam in the summer. Right across the river, the other bank, visible from bank to bank, was this other farm of interest. Now, the raid that got Saddam was so sophisticated, it was planned on a sheet of butcher paper with magic markers. How's that for your stinking technology, right? But really, that's all that was needed. John's team, others that we had worked with, our regular forces, we had done so many operations together by this time that it did not take much for us to organize. Now, there was a little bit of debate about what time we should do the raid. Colonel Hickey was adamant that we should strike as quickly as possible, but then they had to get the actual farm fingered, and that took some time. Iraqis are terrible with maps, so they had to take them out there to look at it. And so you can see in John's own handwriting there that the 2000 hit time was 2000-ish. So it was a little bit. But actually, we ended up launching it on time. Colonel Hickey adjusted forces for the raid. The plan was you would have the 42nd Field Artillery that would be at the top of this near the village of Adwar. That was actually looking to the south. To the left side of the photo, you would have the 1st Brigade Combat Team and their brigade reconnaissance team, which would come in and meet John's team, reinforced by 2 other teams out of Baghdad. And then as they would enter into this orchard area where you see all of the palm trees, they would meet with Des Bailey's ground troop and then the special operations teams that would land. And then before that would go in, the cordon around with the 42nd Field Artillery, 299th Engineers, my unit, which was on the right side of this photo. That was the plan. And as everything got set, 8 o'clock, all troops were set. Both farms were seized. 2 men tried to flee from the circle that you see at the top of this photo, and they tried to run to the north towards the farm there at the bottom. But a guy named John Iverson from Texas, he spotted movement in the woods, and he and another soldier took off after him, and they captured 2 guys. Turned out to be a guy named Caius and his brother, which was Saddam's cook and his driver. We didn't know that immediately, but that's who they were. And they weren't giving up any goods. What we think they did is that they put Saddam in his hiding place, and then they fled in the opposite direction to try to divert the soldiers away. Well, as it turned out, about 20 more minutes goes by, nothing. Everyone was very tense, watching for any indication of any kind of movement, looking for anything. But, you know, the difference this time is that Mohammed al-Muslih had been brought along for the raid. Now, he wasn't too happy about it. He was sitting out in a Humvee. And John, at this juncture, they went out and they got Muslih. And they said, look, where is he? And a few other things I won't repeat. And he said, he's there, trust me, keep looking. Instead, they grabbed him and they brought him in. And the area where Saddam was captured was not very big. You could probably from here to the end of this stage area. And it was a patio area, and you had a gate, you know, tin or, you know, sheet metal type. And then you had vegetation on the fence and all of that. And then it was a patio area and then a 3-room hut. And as they brought Muslih in, there was maybe 5 or 6 of John's team that were there. And then you had Caius and his brother, and they weren't giving up any goods. And then there was they brought a dog there too, not Caius, but John's team. And so now they knew the game was up, and they were pressuring Muslih, and they said, where is he? And he says, he's here. And he whispers. He didn't want to be seen or heard. He was very nervous. He motioned with his foot towards a foot mat. And so they got Muslih out of there and the others, and as they began to brush back the mat and the dirt, it had bits of rope, and they saw the rope was actually handles connected to a top. And John radioed to Colonel Hickey. He said, sir, we may have something. We all perked up. And then as it turned out, as they pulled it up, one of the soldiers had a flashbang grenade throw down in the hole, and it wouldn't kill him, but it'd ring your bell. And they didn't know how far it would go. We knew it was a tunnel, something, a cave. There was a lot of different descriptions. Weren't sure what it was, but now it looked like we might have whatever this was. And so as John's guys pulled that up, a guy named Samir, who was the Iraqi translator, he's now an American citizen. I think he's an auto mechanic today. And he begins to shout and translate what the soldiers were saying and say, "Who are you? Come out, put your hands up," that sort of thing. And they saw two hands at the bottom, like a guy down on all fours. Did not visibly see a weapon, although he did have a Glock 18C pistol in the back of the hole. And nothing. And so finally, as they're shouting, you hear a voice from the bottom of the hole, and it says, "I am Saddam Hussein, the duly elected president of Iraq, and I'm willing to negotiate." And so one of John's guys says, "Well, President Bush sends his regards." And another one says, "Samir, tell him to put his hands up before he gets himself killed." And a little confusion, one hand up and then another. And then they try to grab him by the scruff of the neck. And they finally got him. When they got enough of his hair and him, they pull him up out of the hole. And almost certain it was him. He had a 3-dot tattoo on the crook of his left hand, a sunburst tattoo on the top of his right hand. Those were immediate physical marks that we were all briefed to look for. He appeared to have those. John radioed to Colonel Hickey. He just said, "Jackpot." Now, when they tried to check him for these physical marks, he got a little uppity, and he tried to shove one of the special operators away, and that was a stupid thing to do. So they straightened him out, and that's how he got the cut on his mouth and on his eye. After that, he became, well, cooperative. And then they didn't linger with him. Put a bag over his head, got him out, a pilot I'll call DB, he lands in Little Bird, and the ex-president was taken to his awaiting helicopter outside, and off he goes. They've taken him to the water palace in my area there in Tikrit. And so, as this is going on and it's unfolding, it's very hard to describe for you how we were feeling. You're in the middle of it, you're intense, you know something historic is taking place, but you don't really have time to dwell on it. You're just focused on the mission. As things abated a little bit, Colonel Hickey, he notifies, and then he calls us to confirm what we already knew, and he just said simply, "Cesar Romero." Now, during the summer, there were what-if pictures of what Saddam might look like in disguise. Some showed him with a beard knot, mustache knot, bald knot, whatever. One of them looked amazingly like Cesar Romero, which most of you in here would know played the Joker in the Batman television series in the 1960s. And we used it as a kind of a code name for Saddam after that. And as soon as Colonel Hickey told me, he just followed it up with not a word. He said, "The president has to be notified. It's going to take some time." I said, "Roger, sir." He says, "Cut off all communications outside within your command and await for further instructions." And I said, "Roger, sir." And then I just hung up the receiver, and I had to find a place to be alone for a bit and just reflect on so many things. The blood, the sweat, the tears that our soldiers had shed, how we were able to work hand in hand with Jack and John's teams, our regular forces, 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division. It was a team effort. You know, the title of my book's called "We Got Him," not "I Got Him." It was a team effort. And now the result of all of that was this: Saddam captured. I'll always remember December 13th, 2003, and it will always be one of the proudest days of my life. As I look back on the victory of the hunt and capture of Saddam, I'm also mindful of the cost, the dark days, the moments of sheer terror, the loss of my soldiers, the forgotten sacrifices of the Iraqi people as they have watched the disintegration of their nation, really due to political decisions, not due to what we did in the field. Among the soldiers that we were serving with that night was Ian Weichel and Mark Payne. How are we doing, Franklin? I got 10 minutes? We're good?
Yeah, go ahead, and okay. We'll do a couple of Q's and A's, and then Tom's got a little thing for you.
Good deal. Okay. I want to tell you about Ian and Mark. Ian, he's about my size, and there he is in the Saddam hole. It became a favorite photo op picture. It no longer exists. I did get to see it one more time in 2008 when I went back with Brian Bennett from Time Magazine, armed with a pen as a reporter, and we drove an Opel to Tikrit from Baghdad, but that's a whole different story. They filled it in, so it's no longer there. Little did Ian know, he was in the Brigade Reconnaissance Troop that was in Des Bailey's group on the ground, that when he and Mark Payne were roommates at West Point, that they would both end up in the same units that were participating on the raid. And they made history that night. As we came back, Mark, he was my supply officer later, and then he ended up commanding an infantry company, Ian also. And when they went back in 2006, I got word in April of 2006 that Ian had been killed in action while leading his troops in battle. And so those of us that knew him, we went to Arlington National Cemetery as they laid him to rest not far from here in Section 60. 6 months later, and Ian left behind his son Jonathan, who was born on his first tour, and his wife Wendy. And 6 months later, after suffering the effects of a concussion, but ignoring that from a roadside bomb, Mark Payne disregarded those injuries and led his troops on a combat raid in which he was killed by enemy gunfire. And so those of us that knew Mark, we made another trip that October to pay our respects to a friend. And as we followed Mark's caisson out to his final resting place, if you've ever been out to Section 60, and I go frequently, that's where most of the Iraq and Afghanistan fallen are. When they take them, they lay them down and as they're received, and then they make a new row and they weave it and go back the next one and like that. And as we followed Mark's caisson out, we were stunned to see that he was being laid at the feet of Ian Weichel, roommates at West Point, brothers in battle, and now together forever. After the burial, I began to reflect on a number of things. Waiting for a flight out of Reagan Airport, I was still on active duty, or just on the second burial, had just retired, and I reflected on a lot of things. And I walked around the Capitol Mall for distraction. Everywhere in this town, in D.C., melancholy, predictions of doom and gloom, the hopelessness of our mission. The leader of the Senate declaring our war lost. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Politicians thumping their chest about the cost of it or the hopelessness of it. And so I, for distraction, wandered into the National Air and Space Museum. And as I walked in, I saw this. Spectacular. Central exhibit. The Wright Flyer. Think about what that one invention has changed for our world. And as I walked around it, they had little kiosks explaining how it was built. And there they were. For all great achievements, you will always find that dynamic duo that accompanies them called the cynic and the critic. And there they are, telling the Wright brothers it'll never fly. Looking at it, it's hard to believe it ever did, and that they would risk life and limb to make it so. So I walked out of this exhibit. Hanging above me in the gallery was a sturdier-looking craft with a bold title blazoned on the cowl, the Spirit of St. Louis. And what struck me about this craft was that it had no forward-looking window in it, just a forward-looking pilot at the controls. But yet you go back and read the accounts of the day, there they are. The cynic and the critic, with such encouraging words like, "You fool, you're going to die," like all the others that have attempted it. What makes you think as a male, you're 25, 26 years old, what makes you think as a male pilot at such a young age you're going to be able to fly across the Atlantic Ocean? Right. You'll never get off the ground with the weight of all of that gasoline. You'll never be able to stay awake. You'll never do it alone, blah, blah, blah. As I rounded the corner to examine spacecraft, I was shocked at looking at the Apollo 18 lunar lander, an actual lunar lander from the Scrub mission. It was a little smaller than what I imagined, and I pondered the physics of what to me looked like aluminum foil and wondered how it could sustain life in outer space. How was it that we found Americans foolish enough to believe that you could strap yourself into a rocket containing 2,000 metric tons of fuel that would explode you into space by design, and it would break apart by design and get you into orbit. And then because some scientists, pocket protector pins and all of that, if you go out and get towards the moon, there'll be this gravitational pull, and this craft will be pulled out. Then you'll go and you'll lock, join, 2 astronauts get in, unlock, seal. This will land on the moon upright. The other one will orbit the moon. They'll get out, plant a flag, pick up a few rocks, get back in, pop back up, find the other spacecraft, couple with it, repeat the exercise, and then because of those same scientists with the pocket protectors and stuff say, if you go around the moon in a slingshot fashion, it'll send you back to the Earth at thousands of miles an hour at the right place. And don't worry about the speed. The fiery atmosphere will slow you down. And we'll put little asbestos plates on the bottom, and that'll take care of that. And as you come hurling through the sky at hundreds of miles an hour, parachutes will deploy, and you'll land in the Pacific Ocean. Helicopter, come find you. Absurd, isn't it? And yet, that's exactly what they did with less technology than we now carry in our pocket, on our cell phone. I'll never forget, as a boy, my dad waking me up and said, son, get up. I want you to see this. You'll remember it the rest of your life. And boy, was he right. As I remember on a fuzzy black and white picture, Neil Armstrong walking down that ladder, making history for mankind. But yet you go back and you look at the time, there they were with the war on poverty. The critics, the cynics saying, what about the poor? What about our domestic problems here at home? How much money and billions of dollars we got to waste on this frivolous race with the Russians? And my goodness, cynics and critics. How different would our world be today without Orville Wright, Charles Lindbergh, and Neil Armstrong? And as I re-entered the gloomy mood outside, it dawned on me literally that day that our country has never been built on the advice, counsel, or expertise of cynics and critics. Cynics and critics. Soldiers of our generation have had a belly full of them. Every single monumental mission that our nation has asked of our men and women in uniform since 9/11 has been accomplished. Overthrow the Taliban government, done. Kill or capture Osama bin Laden, shot between the eyes by the Navy SEALs. Defeat Saddam's army and overthrow his government, done. Kill or capture Saddam Hussein, captured, dragged out of a hole, turned over to his own people, and tried like the tyrant he was and hung and brought to justice. And we've done it with the prattle and obstructions of progressive cynics and critics who stood in our path to accommodate their political narratives as we sacrificed our sweat and some blood. As infantrymen, we had to rely on each other, even if we didn't always agree, even when we thought we might have a better way to get the job done, even if we didn't like the mission that we were given and we had to accomplish. We turned to each other and we gathered strength, knowing we had each other's back. You know, there's something biblical about that in Ecclesiastes 4, 2 are better than 1, for they have good reward for their labor. For if the one fall, the other is there to help them. And as it goes on to say, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. At times, we even had to rely on allies that had different motivations, and sometimes former enemies who we were told were now our allies. And let's trust them and get the job done. Rather than parsing our differences as warriors, we focused on defeating the common foe. After returning home from more than 2 decades of service, I have asked myself this question: how did we as Americans allow our voice to be co-opted by self-proclaimed cynics and critics on both sides of the aisle that have divided our marvelous republic? When did American zeal for innovation, sweat, and determination become replaced with intimidation, threat, and extermination of meaningful discourse by pathetic keyboard commandos eating their bags of cheese puffs while sunken in their couches? chew on that for a little bit. America has never been built on the labor and counsel of the cynic and the critic. As Americans, we have to wake up. It's time to rekindle that spirit that united our country, ended enslavement, enriched our land, advanced our arts and sciences, granted women's suffrage, protested inequality, and protected the defenseless. Americans know the difference between what is evil and what is good. The question we now have to ask is, will we unite to continue to live free, and will we be vocal in our faith? I fought for my First Amendment right. They will not silence me. It will not happen. We have to continue to work together. And so will we unite to continue to live free, or will we continue to attack ourselves and give way to cynicism and watch Americans' freedom and place in the world die? Well, thank God America still has people like you, and I'm encouraged by it this morning as I come from the shadow of the Capitol here this morning and sing praises and worship and realize God has not gone anywhere. He's still very much on His throne and moving in the hearts of His people. And thank God America has people like you. You know it's not the cynic and critic that dig the ditch, teach the child, inspire the solutions, or create the future. Sacrifice is that person's stranger. Generosity, his bane, and unity is his enemy. It's time for us to be American again, to inspire, to lead, to unify, to sacrifice. And it starts with sacrificing simple things like doubt, sacrifice anxiety, sacrifice cynicism. We can't allow soldiers like me to come home from a decade of war to see our republic overcome by the self-indulgent, the divisive, and the visionless. And as visionary as we veterans and lovers of freedom might claim to be, we'll make little headway if our only answers to our friends and neighbors are mere sideline snipes about what's wrong with our country today, while we attack fellow Americans who might just differ with us. Are we so short-sighted that we cannot accommodate dialogue, exchange ideas, show some deference, and rebuild our nation? It's time to show the American people what's right with our country, not wrong with it, and get back to work. Any soldier knows you make use of the time you have, no matter how small. You never quit until the mission is accomplished. And if we want to honor those Americans like Ian Weichel and Mark Payne, who will not come home, will never know the joys of marriage and raising their children, who will never live to see their grandchildren, while living in the freedom that their sacrifice purchased for us, then we must rebuild the America that they died for. The sum total of our lives is how we invest them in other people. And we, the people, the defenders of our great nation, have a responsibility to serve God, our country, and if you don't know Christ, make that decision right away. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Well, I'm here to tell you today, I am living proof there is. I made a decision when I was a teenager, reading a New Testament, and came to a saving knowledge in Jesus Christ, knowing that I'm a sinner, and that if I ask Him in my heart and believe in Him, that He will restore that relationship with God and forgive me of my sins. We have to give back to God, serve our country, give of our talents and efforts to preserve our freedom. And may you be such people. As you face the wind, look to the future, you're always going to have the naysayers. Always. They're always going to be there. So ignore them. You know, those people around you that take counsel of their fears. They will critique you, they will discourage you, and they will do it so they'll somehow feel better about their pathetic, sedentary lives. Don't listen to what they have to say. They have nothing to say that you need to take counsel of. Nothing that builds, encourages, or inspires. Instead, stand true. Take risks. Lead. Achieve. Labor. Work. Ignore the calls of the cynic and critic telling us it'll never fly. Above all, keep the faith. Don't ever quit. God bless you all. I've enjoyed my time with you here this morning.
We're going to take a few minutes of question and answer, and then we'll do the box of wheat. So, does anybody have a question? Yes, Ralph?
Yes, sir.
Could you speak to us about those two Iraqi businessmen you called that came in and briefed you for 2.5 hours, what they risked, and
They risked a lot.
anything that happened to them?
Yeah, they have suffered a great deal. They're very shrewd. They have businesses in Jordan. I have been in contact even in the last couple of months. But if anyone deserved the reward for Saddam's capture, it was them. They never got a dime, just because of the chain of events of how it unfolded from those early days to the time when we got him 6 months later. But they risked everything, and I don't mention their names in the book. I would love to see them again. I have not seen them since since April 2004 is the last time I saw them. I've often wondered how they're doing. Yeah. Yes, sir.
There's no shortage of people trying to tell us what the foreign challenges and foreign threats of the United States are. Based on your experience, based upon your time in Congress and your military background, some say it's Russia, some say it's this, some say it's that. What do you think are the greatest threats to our national security that are facing us right now?
It's not global warming. I just returned from circumnavigating the globe last month. Went to South Korea. We went to Turkey. We were in Ankara when the Russian ambassador was assassinated there. Tragic. We went to Kosovo, Germany, and then we came back. Russia is a major threat. Not just for Syria. Syria they have an interest in. With the air base in Latakia and the port of Tarsus, a blind man could have seen that they had an interest there. And it should not have been a shock to anyone that, gee, when insurgents get within mortar range of one of those bases, they're going to intervene. Hello. They did. Nevertheless, what they've done in Crimea, what they're doing to infiltrate Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc governances, not just Ukraine and Georgia, and I was in Georgia in October, the weekend prior to their election. And then I went to Bulgaria and Lithuania. As I go to all of these places, they love the United States of America. It's amazing. People still do. And they recognize that Russia is holding them by the throat because of the natural gas and other resources that we have 4 quadrillion cubic feet of. You know, we've got Oklahoma. I know a little about natural gas. And so they are a major threat. North Korea, Kim Jong-un is a massive threat to the peace and security of the entire world. And we have to partner with China, Japan, South Korea, even Russia, whoever we need to partner with to contain the threat of nuclear war. Terrorism, most Americans agree, is still one of the greatest dangers that we face. I would also put equal to those categories cybersecurity. And we have the smart people in this country to combat it. But we have to have the debates between how much we want to protect and then how that meshes with our Fourth Amendment and First Amendment protections. But we have to have those conversations. We can't just dismiss them because things have gotten to a point where, you know, if I want my records, I contact the Chinese embassy, you know, or whatever. So it is a major threat. We have to address it. So those would be the top 4 security things. And Iran, obviously, a huge threat. They now are the dominant influence in the Middle East, courtesy our foreign policy of the last 6 years. Yeah.
You know what? Religious freedom.
Yes.
President, in his eloquent introduction, mentioned you're leading the fight for religious freedom, and it's great to have a warrior like you doing that. Do you have anything you'd like to share
Sure.
with us about that?
Well, you know, I just put a simple amendment. We put 13 amendment attempts on the National Defense Authorization last year, got all 13 of them. You know, I always subscribe to the thing, you put enough torpedoes in the water, something will hit. We got all 13 on. The one that became a lightning rod for controversy was what they began to call the Russell Amendment. And it was not about anything that progressives were trying to make it be. It simply said that if you were a religious nonprofit organization working with Department of Defense, like World Vision, Catholic Charities, maybe you've got outside a base people that are helping with mental health, substance abuse, our returning warriors dealing with mental health counseling, all of those things. A lot of those have faith-based charters, and we've partnered and worked with these, as many veterans know, for decades. So I simply just said, because of an executive order that President Obama had done that confused this on their eligibility for defense contracts, unless they abandon their religious charters, which, by the way, is protected not only under the law, it's protected under the First Amendment. So I just simply said that they are eligible as religious nonprofits contracting with the Department of Defense under the 1964 Civil Defense Act and 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act. That's all it was. Well, they tried to make it, you know, a LGBT type issue or something. It doesn't even address that. I mean, it doesn't even mention any of that. But once again, you know, don't let the facts and the truth get in the way of anything. It doesn't prohibit anyone from contracting with the Department of Defense. What it did prevent was discrimination against people of faith. So we were able to keep it in there all the way up until, you know, the 24th hour. But the beauty of that was, and in discussions with our conference with Vice President-elect Pence and others, we've been given assurances that many of the constitutional overreaching executive orders that have come forth, there's going to be a stack of those waiting on President-elect Trump's desk on the first day, and he's going to rescind them. We hope that this one will be among them. So please contact the new White House and tell them how much you care about that so that we can undo what was done with the same pen, just different person behind it.
Yes, right.
Yes, sir.
Could you walk us through when you shared with your wife the capture and what was her reaction?
Well, they got it from the media. You know, after Ambassador Bremer at that time announced it to the world where everybody heard it, then, you know, we could kind of talk about it. But they were elated, especially for the units, all of the units that were involved, the hometown atmosphere of that, as she's described it to me, they were just euphoric because it was their guys and gals that were over there doing it and making it happen. And, you know, she was very proud of us. But I can tell you this, that her faith and her prayers were immeasurable support to me and still are to this day. You know, so we can never diminish the power of prayer, and Cindy was absolutely essential in that. Yes, sir.
Sir, how has your faith changed since being a company commander to battalion commander? What were some of the catalysts to make this change?
Well, I think sometimes we think that as we increase in responsibility and influence that somehow we can't be who we are. That's a bucket of nonsense. We absolutely can be. Franklin's known me for a long time. I like to think that I'm kind of the same person. Now that I'm a congressman, try to shut me up. And so, you know, that's why I am vocal about my faith. Why? Because since we've been wearing tricorn hats, we've been doing that. This notion that you cannot speak about your faith is simply that. It's a notion. Now, there's real discrimination that can occur out there. There are bosses in government and even corporate America that can restrict it, but that doesn't mean that it's lawful. And so what I try to do is I go and enter in public, not just to churches, but you know, on the House floor. You can go and look at some of my speeches, you know, issuing real challenges. And even in public forums, I try to let people know that, hey, don't believe, especially for our younger young men and young women, because they're being told that hey, you can't say that. You can't. Well, that's just simply not been the American tradition. We are a nation of freedom. We can express our faith. And so I try to do that because I think it's important to set that example. In terms of responsibility from company command to battalion command, I think, and especially after 3 wars, I've gotten a lot more patient. And I am a lot more tolerant of difference. But I'm not tolerant of rudeness or ungentlemanly or unladylike behavior. Have your differences, but, act with a veneer of civility. Because if we lose our civility and respect for one another, then if we can't even respect our own institutions anymore, our law enforcement, our government, if we lose complete respect for all of that, what's left? You pull the pin on that grenade, and then we have absolute chaos. Everybody, as the scriptures say, doing what's right in their own eyes. And so we have to have that. There's not many things that really get me all that worked up. Now, I can get passionate, but in terms of, I have done the most horrible things that human beings can do to one another. I have taken human life. I have done horrible things as a combat infantryman. I want as far away from that as I can possibly get today. And so I am a more patient man today for that reason, because I've seen what human beings can do to each other, and it's very cruel. I've been in environments where, probably like you got a warrior look about you. I don't know if you are or not, but you look like one. And we've seen how bad it could get, and we don't have that here. I mean, all we have is a list of inconveniences. We don't have anything like what we've experienced, and we hope that we never will. Okay, I'm getting the hook here, and so here we go.
Indeed. Steve, we thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great to interact with you. The chairman of your Republican conference, Kathy Rogers, this is her church. We hope you'll join her
awesome.
And her husband and family
Yeah, she's
sometime
great.
if you're in town over the weekend.
She's a great lady.
We'd love to have you. We did contact your office, and they told us we could not give you an honorarium. But they said nothing about cereal.
That's true.
So, on behalf of the men of Emmanuel Bible Church, we honor you as a champion.
Oh, there we go.
On the front, you got your picture. On the back, there's your bio. That's for you.
That's great.
We thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I like that. Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, man, I welcome you, and we thank you so much for coming. I'm going to invite Pastor Steve Holly, if he's still in the house. He's going to come up and close us in prayer. Remember, if you're visiting with us, we're thankful that you've come. We have a book for you on the way out, and Congressman Russell will be on the way out to sign his book. So, Steve, over to you for prayer.
Thanks. Why don't we all stand together? And I'm going to close with a prayer from the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 3. He said this: I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be strengthened to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. And now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. God bless you as you serve him.